Okay, we're on.
We're on, and more folks are coming in. Just a note to anyone who recently joined us, we've asked everyone to put their name and where they're coming from for this webinar in the chat. It's been a lot of fun already to see um, where everyone is. My name is Anna Truxas. I'm the executive director of the Portland Chinatown Museum, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth presentation in our six-part Hidden History series. It is our second Hidden History series, and it's a series on the Chinese American history in Oregon. But you're going to see that it goes much farther than that. And before we get started, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. The Portland Chinatown Museum acknowledges and honors the indigenous peoples and their descendants of the Lower Columbia and Willamette River region, whose lands the City of Portland and our museum currently occupy. These include Willamette, Tumwater, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Molalla, Multnomah, and Watlala Chinook tribes, and the Tualatin Kalapuya, who today are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and the many other Chinookan peoples who established communities along the Lower Columbia, whose descendants are today members of the Grand Ronde, Warm Springs, and Siletz Confederated Tribes of Oregon. A little bit about today's presentation. Hidden Histories was made possible in part with the generous support and partnership of the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project, the OCDP. It is an award-winning grassroots local, state, federal partnership that was conceived of and initiated in underserved rural communities in southern and eastern Oregon. The research generated through these public archaeology projects is helping to update and center the history of the Chinese diaspora and Chinese Oregonians in the development of the state, and as we see, the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Today's presentation looks at the role of artists in interpreting historical research with archaeologist Chelsea Rose, artist Dale Hom, and musician Jon Lee, along with Robbie Law. Um, and just a few notes about today's presentation. We have turned closed captions on. You can share your questions and comments via the chat and question and answer, the Q&A, and we will read them out loud for our panelists at the end of their presentation. And again, if you want to put your name and where you're from in the chat too, it's just nice to know everyone who's here. So first I'd like to do some quick intros. Chelsea Rose is the director of the Southern Oregon University Laboratory of Anthropology and a historical archaeologist who focuses on the settlement and development of the American West. Chelsea regularly works with the media, students, and community volunteers in an effort to promote archaeological awareness and encourage historical stewardship. Chelsea is a principal investigator and co-founder of the award-winning Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project, was a guest co-editor of the Oregon Historical Quarterly issue dedicated to the Chinese diaspora, and co-edited Chinese Diaspora Archaeology in North America, available from the University Press of Florida. And if you haven't checked out those publications, you really do need to do so. Dale Hom is a retired land and resource manager who worked for 37 years with the USDA Forest Service. He was responsible for partnering with the Wing Luke Museum to interpret Chinese heritage on federal lands. He earned his bachelor's degree in forestry from the University of Washington in 1976. Currently, he resides in Walla Walla, Washington. He serves as a community historian, is a member of the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project Advisory Committee, and enjoys writing and illustrating graphic novels about the Asian Pacific American experience. And then finally, Jon Lee and Robbie Law, a fourth generation American born Chinese and Pacific Northwest native son, Jon Lee, crafts songs and stories that connect people and places. He loves to share his music with any listening audience, and memorable gigs have taken him to the Liberty Theater in Astoria, the Wallowa County Courthouse, the French Glen Hotel, the Matlock Grange Hall, and the Oregon State Penitentiary, with numerous festivals, coffee houses, bars, and house concerts along the way. Musical source points include Buddy Holly, the Beatles, the Brothers, Rodney Cromwell, and Emmylou. Musical inspiration comes from Night Skies, Moving Water, Endearing Daughters, Enduring Friendships, Black Coffee, Slow Food, Sharp Steel, and Straight Grain. He has recorded 4 albums of handcrafted, locally sourced, mostly organic songs. And Robbie Law's introduction comes from Jon Lee, who is providing the bass and the authenticity, and I hope I get this right, to the slime line music. So with that, I'd like to welcome our esteemed, oh no, our esteemed panelists, and just remind everyone that we will be watching Q&A, and we will make sure to get your questions through to them at the end. Thanks, everyone.
Can everybody see that? John, nod because I can see your face. Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, good. All right. So thank you all for coming. I'm so excited to kind of kick off this episode, I guess, of Hidden Histories Part 2. And I'm very, very grateful to my co-panelists for being willing to join me on this talk. I have given exactly 1 gazillion trillion talks on the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project. And while I never get tired of it, I'm afraid you guys will. So I always try to think of new ways to think about this work. And I feel like it's part of our responsibility as this big, huge collaborative effort. We are getting in so much information and so many exciting stories that I always think it's important for us to think about framing them in new and interesting ways. So this is the second version of, Picturing the Past Part 2. So working with artists to kind of think about some of the work we're doing as archaeologists and historians to both to help us think about it more broadly and to share it with others. So just to start out really quickly, and it is not moving. Hold on 1 second. I might have to share this a different way. Sorry about that. Okay, now it's moving. Okay, so just very, very briefly, Anna already introduced the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project a little bit, but it is a multi-agency collaboration that spans the state, and we are adding more and more participants and collaborators to it as we go. It's really exciting, and one of the things that it does is it allows us to think really creatively and to bring in these experts that are not normally available to us as archaeologists when we do presentations. So I'm so thrilled to be able to have this opportunity to showcase some of the collaborative partnerships that we are building along the way. And so kind of the format for today is I'm just going to kind of go through some of the things that we've done so far as the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project to involve and integrate artists into our work. Some of the ways I think we could continue to kind of pull these threads going forward, and then we'll bring in Dale and Jon to talk about their stuff specifically, and then we'll kind of open it up for everybody to discuss at the end. So as we go, keep those questions in the chat as we go so we can have a really robust conversation at the end. So first of all, very quickly, for those of you who have seen talks from the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project over the last couple of years, this won't be surprising, but when I first started doing this work, this was what the map looked like for historians and archaeologists kind of researching Chinese immigrant history in Oregon, like Jacksonville, Portland, Astoria, and John Day, and that was it. And now, after nearly a decade of the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project, this is one of our most recent maps that we just had as part of an ongoing exhibit at the University of Oregon that's up till February. If you haven't seen it, it's wonderful. But you'll notice there's still some kind of gaps in the middle. And some of that in southeastern Oregon, it's desert, there's nothing there. But of course, in central Oregon, there's a lot of communities that we just haven't been able to track down anything yet. Until, last month I gave a talk in Pendleton and I kind of showed this map and said how frustrated I was. I couldn't find it, or not Pendleton, Prineville. Frustrated I couldn't find any Chinese immigrant history in this area, and the emails came in. So it's everywhere we're looking in Oregon, we're finding evidence of Chinese heritage, and I think that'll continue the more research we do. So that's very exciting, and it just really emphasizes how much that this is Oregon history. And so we're really looking forward to continuing to find ways to showcase these stories. As I mentioned, this is part 2 of using archaeology or using the arts to kind of inform archaeology. Last time I had a conversation with the novelist Jessica Shi and Barry Fong, who's made a bunch of different documentaries about how their work and how they have drawn from the work of archaeologists and historians to inform, their creative process. And it was such a fun discussion that it inspired me to kind of add in new genres. So we've got musicians and graphic artists today. So we've also worked with the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project before. Sam Rojas Chua was the artist in residency for the Portland Chinatown Museum in 2022. He came out with us and embedded with us in the field in a bunch of different contexts, and it was amazing. Not only was he very inspired, and he was making art from he was making ink from charcoal that we were digging up in real time and making these beautiful panels. But also for us as scientists, it was so wonderful and inspiring for us to get reminded to look up, to think about other things besides, you know, the dirt and the artifacts and kind of more the quantification kind of aspect of our work. Because Sam would ask these questions like, wow, I wonder what Doc Hay looked at when he laid in bed at night. Do you think that painting over there, you know, just things like that that really helped us humanize our sources or our subjects, and also to really bring in more of the senses. He also, I remember one other thing that really struck me was we're hearing the birds that are the descendants of the birds that the people in the John Day Chinatown you would have heard 100+ years ago. So all those different, that lens of the artist was so useful to me. And I've thought so much about all the different things he said that it made me realize how valuable it is. These interdisciplinary conversations are, how important they are for us to get the best, fullest grasp of these stories as we can. We also collaborated earlier this year with an artist as part of a group show at Southern Oregon University's on-campus museum, the Schneider Museum of Art. This was an artist, Alice Ito, who he was interested in using material culture as a way to kind of present ideas of immigration and exclusion and racism historically. And so he picked out some of the artifacts from some of our excavations in Jacksonville and created these beautiful installations. The artifacts weren't a permanent part of it. They went back to our, you know, museum or collections after, but it was a really, really cool opportunity for people to interact with this material culture in a different way out in the wild. Not commonly do you see artifacts in this context. And so, you know, there was a lot of security in place, so they were safe, but it was also a really cool opportunity for things like this to get out of these boxes and dusty storerooms and into the wild, where they can, you know, inspire people and really make people think about, you know, the past in new ways. So that's another really exciting opportunity that I hope to do more of, to, you know, collaborate with artists on, you know, just whatever inspires them is something that's really interesting to me and my colleagues. Another fun thing, getting a little bit more abstract now, this is a current project we're working on. We've been in touch with descendants of folks from the Galway grocery store that operated in North Bend along the coast for many years. Bruce Lum is a descendant, and he let me know that he has a collection of stuff from his grandparents, and one of the things was this basket of records. And I was very interested because I think records are cool. But when he brought them for us to look at, my students have been inventorying them, but they're really old acetate records, one-sided records. I think they date from about 1890s to 1911 is the collection. Some of them have sleeves that show where they were purchased from in Marshfield, so from other stores. And all of them are Cantonese opera. And it's really, really cool to think about, you know, as archaeologists, again, a lot of times our questions are, what were people eating? What did their dishes look like? What are the buttons from their clothing? But what often gets lost is that is joy and, you know, the richness of people's lives. The fact that this family had a record player and was playing music, and there's a soundtrack. And I think that's such an important component to humanizing, you know, the subjects that we are researching. And since we have started to think about this, we've put the call out to see who else has records, and there's lots of other historical societies and collections that have records in them. So I'm really excited to see where this takes us, to see about some of these early, you know, the music and the ways people were exchanging records historically. And again, that's kind of like a way to bring the arts into the archaeology. Another way, getting even more abstract, that I've been thinking about this too, is Thinking about arts and artistic people in ways of creativity and problem solving, and the ways that their creative approach to life might have informed and made them especially good at what they were doing. So one example is Ing He in the Kamwa Chung in John Day. We've done a lot of work on that site. And so just thinking broadly about how we could think about his, creativity through the archaeology is some of the things I was thinking about is the way that he imported medicines, but then also he would repurpose bottles, old bottles, beverage bottles to serve his customers because he didn't have access necessarily. John Day's very small today, was very small then. So just creative ways to kind of make his business practice work. Another thing that I've been thinking about a lot is the way that he creatively manipulated his environment to accommodate his disability. As he got older, he became increasingly blind. And so one of the things I've been looking at in old photographs is some of the things in the household that might have been ways that he helped, accommodate that and maintain his autonomy over time by making the world around him easier to navigate. So a lot of those things, I think, too, are ways that we can think about using like an artistic lens through thinking about archaeology, again, to get a greater sense of the humanity of the people that we're studying. One last example before we get into the actual art and artists that you want to hear from, but this is metallurgy and blacksmithing. So one of the big dominant, I'd say, stereotypes is that Chinese immigrant laborers were low skilled or unskilled laborers that just did their work and that was it. And so we also know that there's a variety of expertise that we're seeing across all the industries that we're studying. But here in mining, we found a blacksmith shop. We think it's the only Chinese blacksmith shop that's been excavated in Oregon that I know about. If you've heard about more, please let us know. But one of the things we found that's been really interesting, in addition to just repurposing tools to better suit, the work that they're doing, is we've been finding lots of these little funny things that I thought at first looked like shoehorns, but one of our volunteers identified them as this pick handle support because these completed picks are in the local museum in John Day. And so we've been studying these to see what are these called, who else makes them. And after a couple of years of kind of having the word out, we found this is one example of the same type of thing in Southern Oregon, but it's different. You can see it's a way to hold the top of the pick onto the handle because they're doing mining in really difficult circumstances and it's hard on the tools. So this is an adaptation that was made to make this tool function better. In the Oakland Museum, I found another example, same thing, but looks totally different. So that leads me to think because these specific artifacts we found in one mining area in Eastern Oregon and also in Idaho. And these two mining rushes are really interrelated, and there's a lot of folks traveling back and forth. So one of the things that my colleague and I who've been studying this have been thinking, what if this is one blacksmith's work? What we are able to track is the skill and the workmanship of one craftsman across space and time. And that's another really exciting opportunity, I think, for us to think about skill and art and creativity in the archaeological record, which again is not a lens that we often use to think about things through. So now we're going to get to the main exciting part of this conversation, which is my colleagues that are here joining me today. So I'm going to start with handing this over to Dale because he has been bringing to life some really, really fascinating aspects of Oregon history. When I first started working at the Kamwa Chung, I heard about Chinese cowboys. And one of these photos that you can see, this photograph, is of Marquis Tom, who's one of those cowboys. And I've been so obsessed ever since. And Dale has been, bringing, like I said, getting them off out of the ether and onto the page. He did a comic, which you can see in our 2021 historical quarterly thematic volume, all about Buckaroo Sam. And, and I'll let him kind of talk about his process and what inspired him to do this. So Dale, do you want to put your camera on and join me here to talk about this?
Okay. All right. Am I on right now?
You are. So I'll let you give a spiel and I'll mute And then,
All right. Well, let's see. Um, Chelsea, do you want to just go to that first image first and we can talk about it?
yeah.
All right. So, of course, this is Marquis Tom. And I'll just say that, growing up in Seattle, some of my earliest experiences with, this whole Chinese pioneer heritage was simply watching Bonanza with everybody else, and watching Victor Sen Young as Hop Sing. Well, and then when I started working for the Forest Service and my 35 years of public service, 37 years, I started really to become more attuned to what Chinese, were doing throughout the American West. And Chinese cowboys was one thing that really fascinated me. And in John Day, of course, there's Buckaroo Sam. And then there was his friend, Marquis Tom. Marquis Tom was, I think, in Dayville, and he helped as a cowboy, and he was also a cook, and he worked, on a farm that was largely with Chinese laborers as farm hands, as ranchers, gardeners, etc. So anyway, this particular image, as you can see, it's kind of taken from this historic photo. And I believe these guys were some good friends of Marquis Tom, and they went to La Grande, Oregon for this photograph. So I just kind of imagined what it was like minutes before, in that time period, you had to stand stock still when you were taking photographs. So I thought I'd have kind of a painting of these folks minutes before they had to freeze in front of the camera. So that's Marquis Tom and his friends. And I think maybe Marquis Tom was actually uh, keeping these guys out of trouble. So, all right. So is there another image, Chelsea? And of course, yeah, Chelsea mentioned this. This was a fun project. It's not very often that you see graphic novels in a publication like the Oregon publication, but it was fun to do, and I think it attracts a different audience. It lightens some of that highly academic writing into something that can be kind of fun and offer it in a different perspective. So that's Buckaroo Sam. He's a really interesting fella, and he had quite a reputation in John Day. And I think one of the stories that really fascinated me was, he lost some of his fingers in an accident as a cowboy, but he lived his entire life, and died in John Day. All right, is there another one, Chelsea?
We have a few more that we'll skip to in a bit, but I just
Okay.
wanted to ask you one question before we go to John. So, one of the things I think is so cool is Buckaroo Sam. We don't know enough about him. Like, he wouldn't have made it in this volume as a standalone piece otherwise, because we don't have enough to like write an article about him. But to bring him to life using, just the creative lens of the artist allows him to kind of hold space in that. And also, I think from now on out, it's not going to be a big shocker that there were Chinese cowboys, because here's this document that kind of is educating people about this. Whereas, when I first heard about it, I'd never heard anything before. So I just wanted you to speak a little bit to how you didn't have a lot to work with either. So you were able to use artistic license to try to tell this story in a way that felt respectful and important to kind of, again, hold this space for this type of, an early Oregonian.
Right. Yeah. So I had to, do a composite of that, Chinese pioneer experience, where folks would have arrived into the United States, how they might have traveled to a certain location, whether it was in San Francisco into the mining camps, or in one case with Doc Hay, I think he came through Portland and then over to Wallula and Walla Walla, where I live, and then down to John Day. So I took some license, as a graphic artist to say that suppose, Buckaroo Sam took that very same journey through a variety of small towns, following in the footsteps of folks like Doc Hay. And so, and then his experiences as a cowboy. I having lived here in rural parts of the West for several years, I kind of have a good feel for what some of these cowboys, have gone through over the years, and I took that spirit and put it into Buckaroo Sam to give him as much of that cowboy feel as I could.
Thank you so much, Dale. And don't worry, everybody, we're going to hear more from Dale. So I hope you're all putting your questions in the chat and the Q&A. Now we are going to go over to Jon. And I'm very excited. I love this photo so much. And last time I talked to Jon and Robbie, they were like, oh, we're related to folks in there. So I'll let him speak a little bit about that. But one of the things I think is so cool to have a musician as part of this conversation is when we were on the coast in Astoria with our field school this summer, we had a story sharing event, which is where I met these folks. And Jon shared this song with us that he's about to play. And they're, chills and tears. And I've given a lot of talks and I've never brought anyone to tears in my day. So I think it's, again, a really powerful, really intimate way to kind of share these stories with the public. And so I wanted Jon to talk about his process and the stories behind this work. And we'll do this song now and we'll do the other song after we go to Dale again, Jon. Just
First thing I'll tell you, Dale, if you go to my website, this is kind of shameless self-promotion, but if you go to my website, Jon Lee Tunes, that's Jonlee Tunes, and you get to my album, Chinaman's Chance, that picture right there on the cover of it, one of the songs in it is called Hip Hop Sing, and it's about hop sing. And if you grew up watching TV back then, like our two main role models were Hop Sing on Bonanza and the bellhop on Paladin, Have Gun Will Travel. And I was trying to figure out what his name was, and as far as I can tell, that guy in the bellhop was only referred to as Hey Boy. He never actually had a name. He was just called Hey Boy by Paladin. So I always kind of thought that was very indicative. This song is called Slime Line, and I wrote this song because the Fisher Poets Gathering, and I play at the Fisher Poets Gathering every year with Robbie, and they only, and I don't have a direct connection to the fishing industry as a fisher, but they said, well, yeah, you can come in if you got to write a song about the cannery workers. So I wrote this song called Slime Line, and I have to give like co-songwriting credit to my father, because some of the things I say in the song are direct quotes from my dad talking about those times. And that's and that picture right there, that's our grandfather, is as they said at the beginning of Ocean's 11, he's the little Chinese guy there. And he's the guy with the pitchfork right in the middle, picking up, and that's our grandfather. And you'll hear more about him a little bit later in the second song. And there's also, in the second verse, there's a reference to, this is kind of about the process. There's a reference to an industrial machine you can see there called the iron chink. And it was the one that they did half the labor of the Chinese salmon cleaners and workers. And so in their honor, of course, putting them out of work, they named it after him. They called it the iron chink. And that's kind of how you have to own this stuff, because it's a word that you hear when you're a kid growing up. But if you own the word and take it for yourself and say, okay, there's no iron Italian, there's no Faro Filipino, it's an iron chink. So we took some pride in the fact that they did such great work that they named the machine that made them unemployed after them. So, and personally, I like the word iron chink because I want to make it, I see it as a superhero name. It's like Iron Man, Batman Iron Chink. So anyway, this song is called Slime Line, and it's also the name of my flash mob band that appears once a year at the Fisher Poets Gathering. Yes. Ready? When the fish came up the river, you could see it from the town. Gave a slight sheen of silver with a murky greenish brown. When the fleet moved out, there'll be no doubt. When the fleet came in, we'll be working again. We're working on the line, yeah, we're working all the time. We're working overtime on that slime line. We're working on the line, yeah, we're working overtime. We're working overtime on that slime line. Well, I need a bowl of rice, hot tea to drink, but we gotta keep feeding this iron chink. I'll work a double shift from the break of dawn, fall asleep on my bunk with my boots still on. We're working on the line, yeah, we're working all the time. We're working all the time on that slime line. We're working on the line, yeah, we're working overtime. We're working overtime on that slime line. Well, my cousin runs the crew, my daddy works the pier. This is what we do, this is why we're here. Then the salmon moved on, the cannery shut down, and the family clams all left this town. No more working on the line, no more working all the time. No more working all the time on that slime line. No more working on the line, no more working overtime. No more working overtime on that slime line. When the fish came up the river, you could see it from the town. Gave a slight sheen of silver to the murky greenish brown. When the fleet moved out, there would be no doubt. When the fleet came in, we'll be working again. We're working on the line, yeah, we're working all the time. We're working all the time on that slime line. We're working on the line, yeah, we're working overtime. We're working overtime on that slime line. We're working all the time on that slime line. Yeah, ye, some say.
Yay!
Thank you.
Excellent. I hope you can see there's lots of hearts and claps coming up from the audience.
Yeah.
That is so great. One more thing too, I wanted to say while we're still on the topic of fishing, in addition to having multiple generations working in the canneries, I mean, your family also has made really amazing contributions to fisheries as well. Robbie, it's your dad that had the fish lab, right?
Yeah, he worked. My dad worked at the Seafoods Lab, which was extension from Oregon State in the food technology department, food science department. One of his first big projects was working with a group from Oregon State and the Fish Commission that developed the Oregon Moist Pellet, which contributed to the success of hatcheries and actually throughout the world now. The Oregon Moist Pellet is used globally, but in those days they revived the salmon runs on the Young's Bay part of the Lower Columbia, and it was a really big success. Our family's very proud of that.
Yeah, canning and fishing royalty. And then also, wasn't your dad instrumental in the creation of imitation crab too?
Well, I wouldn't say he's instrumental. He wouldn't say that, but he was involved in the use of hake, which was before it was a bottom fish that was kind of a waste bycatch product that wasn't used, and they figured out that they could make imitation seafood products with ground up hake. There's a bunch of other projects that my dad was involved in. I think when you were talking about the creativity of the folks that came in the Chinese diaspora, I really think of him because he was probably the most creative person I know in our family.
Yeah, amazing, amazing.
He
We
made
were
great
gonna go
presents.
ahead.
He made great Christmas presents every year. So whoever got Uncle Duncan to got drawn to make a present for him, it was a great present. A couple of things I'd add to that. One is that what Robbie said about international use. Um, I was on a dive boat in Zanzibar, believe it or not, and there was a German fisheries guy working in Ethiopia, and I just asked him, I said, "Do you ever use the Oregon moist pellet?" He said, "Well, of course, that's the world standard." And so he was kind of amazed that was my uncle that developed it, but I was felt really proud that happened. But the other perspective on the slime line I'd offer you in this picture and this celebration stuff is that, well, first of all, Rob, the Oregon moist pellet story is told about the Garden of Sturgeon Waves in that story on the story wall. And our family has two stories on it that we'll get to the second one pretty soon. But when that opened and Robbie's dad was well respected and had to kind of sign off on it, and your brother and Stacy were involved in it too, I think.
And Swen Ho, who's in the audience, was
Yeah.
the architect.
Yeah, so there was a lot of people on that, and I tried to get my dad to come down and celebrate. And I said, "This is a great thing about that." And my dad, he said, "Why do we celebrate that?" He said, "We're basically slave labor," and it wasn't quite bitter, but it was resentment, which is kind of like a couple of tiers below bitter, right? But he didn't see any reason to celebrate the work that they did there. So that's just the other perspective, is we can sit back and put it up there and celebrate Slime Line and the contributions and acknowledge them. But it wasn't a lot of fun, and the people who just did it kind of wanted to go like, okay, we're done with that. We're going to be photographers or biologists now. So that's just another perspective I'd offer on it. So
Yeah, no, I think an important perspective for sure. And one thing before we switch gears away from canning and fishing is if anybody missed, I think the first or second Hidden History series with Jackie Chung and Eric Gleason, they talked about some of the research on the canning and fishing industries that they've been doing. So I encourage you to go to the archived episodes or series to listen to that to find out more. Okay, we're going to go back to Dale, and then Robbie and John, stay tuned because we're coming back for you next. So, Dale, I wanted to have an opportunity for you to talk about this series of paintings, and I can see one behind you on the wall. Because when you first told me about them, you framed them as looking at Chinese pioneers on the frontier. And I thought that was so awesome to kind of to pull this language, this coded language that's so intricately enmeshed in this white fantasy past history, like this master narrative of the West, which has sidelined or stereotyped, Chinese Americans. And so to pull these experiences and these stories and reframe them in your own way, I think has been really powerful. So I wanted you to kind of talk us through. I have 3 of them here. And before we do that, I just also want to acknowledge that Dale has been doing the OCDP work for 30 years, long before the OCDP ever existed. So really doing public history in these rural spaces to kind of engage folks in these stories. And I think that I just want to acknowledge that. And then I'll hand this over to you. So we have the vegetable peddler, the baker, and then the railroad, just so you know what ones I have here for you.
Okay, so the vegetable peddler, so many of the communities out in the West, that had Chinese workers, Chinese immigrants, pioneers living in those communities. Some of these areas had 1 in 4 were Chinese, 1 in 5, 1 in 6 were Chinese pioneers. And in many of these communities, I discovered that they were gardeners, perhaps bringing their craft from, the homeland and bringing it over here to the United States. A lot of terrace gardens that I discovered on the Payette National Forest and on the Boise National Forest in Idaho. I think there's also some garden activities over in Eastern Oregon that I've heard of and have seen some evidence of. So anyway, that inspired this. Of course, in Walla Walla, it's a huge history of Chinese gardening in Walla Walla, Washington. And so my spouse thought that instead of calling this the vegetable peddler, it's really Chinese pioneer DoorDash, because these are the folks that were, growing the vegetables, and they all had them in these wooden, poles and straw baskets, and they would take their produce to all of the homes in these rural communities. And I've read accounts where people just left their doors unlocked, and the local gardener would come in there and just, drop off groceries for the day or for the week. So, you'll have vegetables in there. You may have eggs and other items as well. So that's what inspired this particular one. Chinese pioneer DoorDash. I kind of like that. This one here is American as apple pie. Okay. And it's kind of inspired by, well, the fact that my grandfather on Vancouver Island was a baker, and quite a respectable baker in British Columbia. And, I've also read in logging camps, they had Chinese cooks in logging camps. In some cases, these logging camps would protest and go on strike if there was any threat of the Chinese chef, being kicked out of the kitchen. And so, I was inspired to do this one. And I believe that old Chelsea, the ranch that we were looking at this past summer, had a Chinese cook. And I envisioned just this individual, cooking apple pies and in the early morning, and with that steam and aroma kind of wafting through the windows of that one house that we were surveying next to.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I was gonna say that was the Stewart Ranch, so out there near south of Dayville.
right.
So yeah.
Okay, and then let's see another one there. So this is, Dragon Dance on the Meadow Road. The Meadow Road would be the American translation for, what the Chinese would call a railroad. And this one here was kind of inspired. I've had this one in my mind for quite a few years now. I started really painting during the pandemic. I had much more free time as everyone was kind of closed off and closeted. So I decided to concentrate on painting, and I did this one here. It kind of depicts a scene perhaps over in Utah, close to Promontory Point, Utah, where the Union Pacific Railroad and the Southern Pacific kind of joined, or Central Pacific joined in Utah back in, what was it, 1868. And so, I really wanted to kind of get the spirit of who built the railroad, from the west to Utah. And it was really done on the backs of these Chinese laborers. So, and I thought I would just kind of incorporate some things that I'm familiar with, is, the traditional Chinese dragon and the dragon parade. And I had envisioned all of these strong, hardworking Chinese pioneers carrying the Jupiter, this train across the Sierras and into the Utah deserts of the Great Basin. So that's kind of the images. And I might have done maybe, I think, 20 different paintings over the last few years. And I'll be showing them at the Pendleton Center for the Arts in February. So if any of you are out over in this part of the world, you can stop by and see them there.
Yeah, we'll make sure to get that linked up on our events list for sure, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many more questions for you, but I know I want to get to get back to Jon and Robbie for their next song. So this one, the little preface I want to do for this one is when I talked to Jon this summer, he showed me this label, and this was your grandpa, correct? Edward
Yeah.
was your grandpa? Okay. And one of the things I loved about this, it was so exciting to me because, again, a lot of times, Chinese Americans are pictured only as just unskilled labor on the slime line. And you don't think about all the other expertise and stuff people are building along the ways on one hand, but you also don't ever get a chance to think about what were their hopes and dreams. And so his grandfather made a label, presumably with the dream of starting his own canning company. And I don't know if it's clear what happened to it, but I just love that there's this moment that we can see this aspiration in this connection with the past, but also this song that you're going to play is another one of your grandpa's dreams. So hopes and dreams for the future. So I think that's kind of, they paired nicely together. So I'll let you take it from here and kind of give the stories and correct if I misspoke on anything.
Are we muted?
No,
Okay. Yeah, what Robbie talked about creativity and Dale talked about adaptability is, during the period right after the railroads were built, called the driven out period. I mean, some people left, some people stayed, but they were very creative in how they survived and found a way to make a niche for themselves. And so that whole entrepreneurial spirit, I mean, our grandfather tried this. I mean, the peak salmon was around 1900. That's the year he was born, 1899. So our whole family thing on the canners was after the peak. And so he tried different things.
Mink farming?
Yeah, he tried mink farming. My dad said he tried to grow mushrooms in the cellar for a while, and that smelled really bad, apparently. My aunts don't remember that one. He tried this salmon label, but just trying to find a way to hang on, sell vegetables. So one of his ventures was around 1938, right about the time our grandmother drowned out there in this slough out south of Astoria. One of his big schemes was he was going to raise bullfrogs as a cash crop. And so he sent to Louisiana, got some pairs of bullfrogs, and they came out in the train, I'm sure, and he got them. And the place they were living was this slough on the Lewis and Clark River, and he had these pens built out there. And he was raising bullfrogs. I guess he had contracts with restaurants and butcher shops in Seattle and Portland and places in between. And before the first cash crop matured, my dad said it rained for like about a week, as it often does down here. And it flooded out the pens, and the gate broke open, and all his frogs in his different stages, eggs, pollywogs, big mature frogs, all got away. And so he didn't make any money on this one either. And as a biologist, he unleashed the plague of invasive bullfrogs in the Northwest. And going kind of a full circle is, I was on the John Day River, like not the one outside of Astoria, the one out there in eastern Oregon about 3 or 4 years ago. And those bullfrogs were in the wetland, the sloughs along the John Day River. You could hear them at night. And it was almost like they were mocking me. But he unleashed an environmental disaster in a lot of ways, because they're not good critters out there in the wild. That's the law of unintended consequences. Anyway, Huh?
They still taste good.
They taste good, yeah. So anyway, this is the song here called Bullfrog Run. Oh, now down in the slough back in 38, you just do what you do to put food on the plate. It might have worked out, but that rusty old gate was just a little too little and a little too late. Are the sins of the father, the sins of the son? Well, I can't undo what my granddaddy done. I'm going down to the slough to watch those bullfrogs run. Are the sins of the father, the sins of the son? Well, when Grandma drowned, she left a lonely man with 6 hungry children on a little bottom land. He sent for some breeding stock from Louisiana. He was a little Chinaman with a great big plan. Are the sins of the father, the sins of the son? Well, I can't undo what my granddaddy done. I'm going down to the slough to watch those bullfrogs run. Are the sins of the father, the sins of the son? Well, the bullfrogs grew like bullfrogs do. They were eating everything, swimming around in the slough. See, Grandpa's dream was 1,000,000 eggs and a pen full of frogs with great big legs. Are the sins of the father, the sins of the son? Well, I can't undo what my granddaddy done. I'm going down to the slough to watch those bullfrogs run. Are the sins of the father, the sins of the son? But from their fate on a plate, through that rusty old gate, in a high water runoff, they made their escape. Thrive and survive, that's the name of the game. Now they're the scourge of the wetland and our family shame. Are the sins of the father, the sins of the son? Well, I can't undo what our granddaddy done. I'm going down to the slough to watch those bullfrogs run. Are the sins of the father, the sins of the son?
Thank you guys. That was really, really fun. That was great. That was great. I am going to just I want to just put one more slide up before I open it for the Q&A because I want to share these links and hopefully everybody can see the full screen. So we have on the left the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project website. If you haven't already checked it out, please do. Lots of stuff there. We've got more stuff coming up all the time. The link in the middle, the QR code, is to Jon Lee Tunes' website, and it's jonleetunes.net or .com?
.com.
.com, and the QR code will get you right there. And then we also have a link that will take you to Dale's art, and hopefully that's a good page to follow on for your next exhibit. And yeah, so and also people can email me or the Portland Chinatown Museum folks to get more information. And I just am rushing through that because I'm going to stop share now so we can get you guys bigger on camera. And hopefully everybody has been putting all their questions into the chat or the Q&A. And if you haven't, yeah, put them in there now, because I would love, I know I've been talking a lot, and I would love for you to have a chance to speak directly with my colleagues here, because I know they have a lot of great stuff. And I can see right now that there's already a question that says, Dale, do you sell your prints, and where can they be purchased?
Where are my prints? You know, I haven't even created prints. I ought to. So
Sounds like it.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll give people a second to get some more questions into the chat. And maybe Capiolani or Anna, you can help me if you've seen some. I haven't been able to follow everything on the chat. If there's more stuff in there, if there's questions I miss, somebody hop in and say. But I wanted to say that, you know, I have a couple of questions for you guys too, so till other people weigh in. Is that a new one? How do we?
Sarah answered this question, but you might want to add to it. Did immigrants from particular geographies like Toisan versus Huiping or surnames specialize in certain industries in Oregon?
I have no idea.
Dale, any insight?
No, not really. You know, I know that I've heard of plenty of Toisan folks working in the industry, but I can't really give you any specific details for demographic, you know.
Probably a lot of it is tied to where people ended up and what was the industry there. But I don't know what Sarah's answer was, but I'm sure she gave a great answer. So
Well, my answer is that usually that first person who lands in a certain spot that has the opportunity, whatever that industry be, whether it be restaurant work, business work, the salmon canneries, they would then, you know, it's we all have village cousins, and so they would send word back home to the village, whether it be their village cousin or their actual family, help sponsor them over, and that starts a form of chain migration. So here in Portland, we have quite a few restaurants that started. The genesis was that this what old legacy restaurant, Chinese Village, it had all the people from Smoky Village, Huiying. And I couldn't figure that out until much later. It's like, oh, they're all related to each other, whether it be familial or village cousin, but they're all from Smoky Village. And that's why Portland, even though it just has a small Chinese community now, has a large community from Smoky River.
yeah, great. Thank you, Sarah. And I see are any of the early Astoria, let's see, where'd it go? I just lost it. Are any folks or any of the early Astoria Chinese buried in Astoria or at the Lone Fir Cemetery in Portland? John or Robbie, do you know that answer from the early families in Astoria?
Some of our families buried at Ocean View Cemetery out in Warrenton. I understand that there's a cemetery somewhere in town that the location's not exactly known. I don't know anything about that except for what I've heard from your project.
Yeah.
So after having done a recent research,
Chelsea's job.
there is so there are two main cemeteries just south of Astoria there. I can't remember their names now, but Ocean
View is in Warrenton area. There's a couple other cemeteries, but you know, I don't.
So there is an old historical cemetery. It had another name in the past, and it might have been part of the Finnish Brotherhood. It's in the Youngs River area. It's now called Clark.
Yeah, agree. That might be Greenwood.
And I think it might be County own. But my understanding was that at one time, outside of the Finnish Brotherhood boundaries, there was a group of old Chinese early migrant workers that were interred there. And then somewhere in the 1920s, most, if not all of them, were exhumed to be returned to China, but by way of the Lone Fir Cemetery here in Portland. Lisa Penner was the one that put me on that. And so I haven't done any more research about that. And I'm trying to see if the CCBA here in Portland has any information in their ledgers from these Astoria bones that were exhumed.
Yes. Yeah, Lisa was a friend of my dad's, and she's probably the biggest, as you folks probably know, the biggest resource for Clatsop County history. I think it wasn't until more recently, like maybe the 1920s, that Chinese were allowed to be buried in cemeteries that were used by other groups. So I think that's why that obscure one somewhere on top of the hill in Astoria.
Yes, on top of the hill, somewhere a few miles from Miles Corner, Miles Crossing. And I just thought it was interesting that it was associated with the Finnish Brotherhood. I don't know whether it was the white group or the red group.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
There are a couple other cemeteries, and there's several in the area, but I'm pretty sure there aren't any Chinese in those.
Well, this one's pretty obscure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In Portland, where my brother and my parents are buried, Riverview is the one up by, like by Selwood Bridge. There's definitely a Chinese section there. It's, you go to their grave and there's all these other Chinese names like that. So that may have been what they said. Okay, one of these guys, we'll put him over there. So it was still kind of segregated back then.
Mm-hmm. So getting back to kind of thinking about the art, so for you folks, are there more things you want to explore? You're thinking like topics, we're talking cemeteries, we're talking death, we're talking difficult, working conditions, all this kind of stuff that's not super fun, but, writing songs or exploring it creatively through imagery to kind of, I just am curious a little bit more if there's more things you guys want to kind of more threads you want to pull, or what's next for you in song and illustration in telling this story. What are the gaps?
Yeah, let me start then. I did one of a funerary burner and kind of a group of Chinese folks in the Mountain View Cemetery here in Walla Walla. And I am kind of inspired to do more art with some of the broken headstones that I see in town, at this cemetery, and kind of this decay that's beginning to happen, and to try to do some art that will inspire the community to get more involved in restoring the old portion of the cemetery. Honestly, it's a cute little cemetery. I mean, it's not cute. It's a very quaint cemetery of 150 years of operation, and the small section of Chinese that are buried there, it's really deteriorated. And so I'm quite interested in using my art to kind of promote the Chinese existence in Walla Walla, and to build that awareness to help in restoration. So
that's great.
Yeah, that's my plan.
Great. Yeah. And Jon, for you, what inspired you to write a whole album about Chinese American experience, both your personal family and wider, and then also to give it to the world for free? Was the mission to just educate people about this?
Part of it was I realized when I recorded my first two albums that there were enough songs about the Chinese experience Chinese American experience that I could I had about half of those songs written, 3 or 4 of them, 5 of them written already and recorded. So I just kind of said, huh. So I put together the gap, and kind of the inspiration, some of it came from, believe it or not, I like Nebraska album by Bruce Springsteen, how it was real simple and real spare. Yeah. And I like the idea of one guy just kind of like a Chinese guy walking around with a guitar writing the history. And the whole album starts in when they're building the railroads, and it ends around the 1860s, and it ends with my mother graduating from Portland State College, who was the first person in her family to graduate from high school, let alone graduate from college. So it seemed like 100-year kind of bookends of those experiences, and I just kind of filled in the gaps. And and I got there's a song about Angel Island there that I stole from Johnny Cash, and there's a I stole a song basically from, I think it's Barbara Mandrell, her song called "We Were Country When Country Wasn't Cool," and one of the last song on the album was called "We Were Asian When Asian Wasn't Cool," and so just go back and listen to it. It's all out there. And the interesting thing, and Dale probably knows this, or people who do creative stuff, is I've kind of stopped writing songs actually the last couple of years, and I just haven't had much. There hasn't been any urgency, and I've turned to writing fiction. And so I'm writing a series of short stories about a family in 2 different phases. One is when I would read these novels and read this history stuff about Chinese, I'd always kind of think, well, I can't do that because I'm not that Chinese anymore. It's like my family's, I barely speak Cantonese. And then I realized that that's part of the assimilation, part of the diaspora. That's part of the whole process. And one of the things that, if you listen to that album, you'll notice is that, see, Robbie's side of my family, my dad's side, we were like 5th generation, basically. Our great-grandmother was born in California. And then, by my mother's side, I have cousins who are 15 years younger than me, who were born in Hong Kong. And they're 1st generation, because they came when they were kids. And that side of my family was Chinese restaurant families. And they were uncomfortably Chinese to me when I was growing up. I mean, I loved them, but that side of the family, and it took me years to figure out that basically I had 2 windows into the assimilation. And the Lee side was here for like 100 years, basically. And so we're assimilated there. But my mother's side was much closer. I mean, they were going back and forth to China and stuff. And like my mother spent time in China. And some of her family were born in China, and some of them were born here, and some of them went back to China. And so it was a real rich kind of vision of being able to, so it's kind of helped me write the fiction I'm writing right now, which is the short stories are pretty much about the Chinese American experience growing up in the 50s. And then the novel I'm eventually going to write is about the railroads, about constructing the railroads. And it's the same family. So I'll be down in California at some point doing more research on all that. So
don't forget the graphic superhero novel, The Iron Chink.
Yeah, I have and Dale, I want to talk to you about.
I hear a mashup.
I am looking for someone to collaborate. I have a short story called The Ironic Chink, and it's about a kid who realizes he wants to be the Iron Chink, but he doesn't know what his superpowers are. And he realizes that it's his weird sense of humor. And so he becomes the ironic chink. And I kind of wrote it visualizing a graphic novel. And my cousin Howard on the Wong side has rights of first refusal, but I'd love to talk to you about and run that story by you and see if because I liked your style right there. It was very plain and simple. I liked it. So we'll communicate about this story.
All right. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I think graphic novels reach a lot of people.
Yeah. I see a few questions coming in, but I just want to have one more question before we put it back to the audience. The Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project is working on building more access and opportunities for artists to embed in our work. So both out in the field with us or, having access to collections or reports. So what do you think as artists, like, what do you think would be most, you're both finding this information without us, you don't need us, but if, you know, for artists that want to access some of the information from the archaeology or the history that we're building, what do you think good opportunities would be for folks? Like, do you have a dream of like, I wish I could have done this to get access to this kind of content? Any wish lists?
No idea. Website, you know,
Yeah.
virtual tours, you know,
Yeah.
Kamwa Chang and Garden of Surging Waves and railroad sites and Dale Studio, you know,
Yeah.
my albums, you know,
A lot of great places exist to get inspiration. That's exciting.
graphic novel
Yeah.
we're going to collaborate on, you know. That'd be that occurs to me, but
You know, Chelsea, I think the artifacts really are important too, you know, seeing some of the things on the ground on, you know, like on some of the tours, when you see fragments of Chinese ceramic and it looks very recognizable as something that my grandmother had in her kitchen, you know, it really makes it personal. And so, boy, I sure would love to have more field experiences for folks to bring them from, you know, the urban places where perhaps they're removed from some of the rural roots that they may have, you know, and you know, kind of have that very visceral touch and feel experience. I think is very cool.
Yeah. And for those in the audience, you can also put in the chat if you would want to go out to one of these sites. We're working with some different collaborators to kind of facilitate getting people out to these areas, because a lot of these archaeological sites are very remote. But okay, let's go see. I guess there's not questions in the Q&A that I can see, but in the chat,
Yeah, we have two.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Let me know.
first one was from Suen. Does the public Oregon school system teach material that include Oregon Chinese history?
Yeah, so we've worked really closely with the Oregon Historical Society to help them with their traveling trunk program. And so they have traveling trunks that have different targeted curriculum. Fourth grade for Oregon is one that's very popular, but they also have older stuff that schools can check out. And we've even had an extra one made that lives in I think it lives at the University of Oregon. That's for that area too. So lots of different opportunities for people to access this, because the goal is, of course, to get this into the classroom and as far as can be.
Our next question is, are there literary works that we could read to learn more about the Chinese experience discussed today? For example, about the Chinese cowboys and other Chinese work.
there's one book I want to mention, and Dale, you're a lot closer to the action than I am. There's a book called Massacres for Gold, and it's an easy title to search. I forgot the name of it, but
Greg Noakes is the author.
Greg Noakes, yeah.
Wait, isn't it? Oh yeah, that's right.
And it's about the Snake River Massacre. Are you familiar with that, Dale?
Yes.
Yeah, and where 32 Chinese miners were on the Hell's Canyon and they were massacred by cowboys from Enterprise, Wallowa County. And that's a really powerful book. And I have a song about it on that album called Deep Serpent River, the Snake River, Serpent River. And one of my ambitions is to go down to the site of the massacre with a videographer and sing the song that I wrote about that event. And I want to be sitting behind a rock, and I want to submit it to NPR with a Tiny Desk concert, because I want to try something completely different than Tiny Desk concert. Say, this is my desk, and this is where we'd have the concert down there. And so that's a place, and that's a book you probably might want to read. And for me, one of the more personal moments, and you mentioned in the website or the introduction that one of the places I've played is the Wallowa County Courthouse. I played a concert there, and that's where the records of that trial, that mock trial, were kept in a vault for like decades. And so for me, being able to play in the county courthouse courtyard about that incident was a real circle and closure for me there. But that's a book you ought to read.
Well, also say that Beth Lou Williams has a new book out called John Doe Chinaman. I haven't read it yet, but I just got it, and I think that that'll be an excellent read. All of her stuff is really wonderful if you get a chance to see her work.
We have one last set of questions from Kay Singh. Are there any stories about the 1922 fire in Astoria? The Punjabi community left. Did the Chinese stay, and did they live near each other in any other parts of Oregon? I think near maybe other Punjabi communities in other parts of Oregon.
I don't know that I'm just starting to do research in Astoria. So John and Robbie, do you know? I don't know.
A lot of the families left at because peak salmon was like 1900. So when you were working, you worked for the factory where the Bumblebee was going by the time you were in high school, right?
No, I worked in Bumblebee before they kind of left town, but there were very few. There were maybe 60 Chinese left in Clatsop County by the time I was a kid. And that's from the 1880s when there were like a third of the population in Astoria was Chinese. So there was a really big change. The mechanization plus the decline of the fisheries both affected that a lot. There were a few folks that were still working when Bumblebee was still in the cannery, that families that were still here, but not very many.
Lum's Auto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other question from Kay Singh, are Chinese back in Astoria and any historical sites there?
Historical sites in Astoria. Well, start with.
Well, there's the Garden of Surging Waves, which is a memorial site, which is beautiful and definitely worth checking out if you're there. A lot of the cannery sites, well, there is the one cannery still there that was the Bumblebee site, but now it's something else. But there are some sites, I would say, associated with the early canning and fishing.
And how about the breakwaters? Was the breakwater there right in Astoria? Was that constructed by Chinese labor?
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah. Out by Fort Stephen. Yeah.
Have you found documentation of Chinese working on the jetty? Because we always understood that they were involved in that, but I understood we can't find any actual documentation of the work.
Guess what? Archaeology to the rescue. We found stuff this summer out there, and we were like, what's this doing out here? And then I look over and there's the jetty. So I think that there is probably something to that. There is some archaeology that remains that I haven't studied in depth, but just anecdotally, I would assume that that's how that collection got in the ground. Yeah. Lots of work to be done. I mean, we're finding out so much, but there's also so much work to be done. And I see Suen said, yes, I want to say this too. Do check out Joanna Ogden's work. She's got a lot of publications out in a book about the Punjabi history in that area. A lot of excellent stuff. So, yeah. And I think we're about at time. So unless there's one more thing, I think
we want to give a shout out to our engineer and producer.
Yeah. Shout out to our engineer producer Stephanie over there. We're in her house. She's there with her dog, waiting, and
thank you, Stephanie.
I'm a techno idiot, so.
Well, that was really a wonderful presentation, and I just want to give a big Portland Chinatown Museum thank you to all of our presenters. And in the chat, we'll copy it and make sure you have it. But people just love that presentation, and you're seeing the applause and hearts now for it as And thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us. You were great from the very beginning, sharing where you're from, lots of hearts and applause while, artists were talking about their art, musicians were playing their music. We're very grateful for this community. If you'd like to rewatch this program, they are available. Usually the recorded version is available about a week afterwards. And so if you missed anything or if you want to go back and listen to the music or something like that, please feel free. You can also probably access Chelsea's QR codes that way as well, in case you missed them. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, that's just a reminder that today's event is the fourth of 6 Hidden Histories presentations, and our next presentation, the 5th presentation, will be on Zoom on Saturday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. It's entitled "The Lung Family Lineal Descendants Connect the Past and Present at Auburn, Oregon." And this presentation looks at the uniquely Oregon story of the Lung family with family and community historian Linda Lung and archaeologist Catherine Dixon. You'll find more details about this presentation and links to register on our website and Facebook page by next week as well. So just another round of applause and huge thank you to everyone that was here today and to our wonderful audience. I just want to reiterate what we saw in the chat, which was this was really a beautiful, truly wonderful presentation. So thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing folks at the next Hidden Histories in February. Thanks, y'all. Oh, happy holidays. Here.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
What, Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea, Dale, John, and Robbie for incredible presentations.
Yeah, Robbie was our bonus guest.
I know.
Yay. Thanks, Robbie.